The crystal plate shattered against the Italian marble floor of La Couronne d'Or, sending fragments scattering like fallen stars across the kitchen's pristine surface. Every head in the bustling Manhattan restaurant turned toward the source of the sound, a woman in a stained white uniform who stood frozen, her dark hands still extended from where the plate had slipped. "Unbelievable!" roared a voice that cut through the dinner rush chaos like a knife through butter. Richard Castellane, owner of the five-star establishment and heir to a restaurant empire worth $400 million, emerged from his private dining room with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire privileged life. 3 weeks. You've been here 3 weeks, and you still can't handle basic dishwashing without destroying my property? Elena Martinez, 42 years old and exhausted from her double shift, bent down to collect the shards with trembling fingers. The kitchen staff, 20 people strong, paused in their work, their eyes darting between their boss and the woman who had become invisible to most of them over the past 3 weeks. "I'm sorry, Mr. Castellane," Elena whispered, her accented English barely audible above the clatter of pots and the sizzle of pans. "The plate was wet, and it—" "Save your excuses," Richard interrupted, adjusting his Rolex, a watch that cost more than Elena would earn in 5 years. At 45, he was handsome in that polished, artificial way that money could buy. Perfectly styled salt and pepper hair, teeth whitened to an unnatural brightness, and a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "You people always have excuses." The phrase hung in the air like toxic smoke. Several kitchen staff members shifted uncomfortably. Maria, the sous chef who had worked there for 15 years, opened her mouth to intervene. But Richard's withering glare silenced her before she could speak. "You people?" Elena repeated quietly, finally looking up from the floor. For the first time since the plate had fallen, she made direct eye contact with Richard Castellane. Something in her gaze, a depth, a knowing, a quiet strength made him momentarily uncomfortable, though he would never admit it. "Did I stutter?" Richard sneered, emboldened by the presence of his dinner guests, who had followed him into the kitchen. Among them was his son, Marcus, 26 years old and visibly uncomfortable with his father's performance. "Workers from your background, people who don't understand the value of quality, of precision, of excellence." Elena stood slowly, brushing off her uniform with a dignity that seemed incongruous with her position. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet 4 inches, with silver threading through her dark hair and hands marked by years of hard work. But something in the way she carried herself suggested a past that Richard couldn't quite place. "You want to talk about precision?" Elena's voice was soft but clear. "About excellence?" Richard laughed, a harsh, braying sound that made his dinner guests chuckle nervously. "Are you seriously going to lecture me? I trained at Le Cordon Bleu. My restaurants have 17 Michelin stars between them. My head chef," he gestured to Jacques Beaumont, who stood near the main stove looking deeply embarrassed, "studied under legends in Paris." "Then perhaps," Elena said, her voice gaining strength, "you wouldn't mind a small demonstration." The kitchen fell completely silent. Even the timers seemed to stop beeping. Richard stared at the dishwasher as if she had just sprouted a second head. "A demonstration?" he repeated slowly. "Of what, exactly?" "How to drop plates more efficiently." "Of cooking," Elena replied simply. "Your chef studied under legends. I wonder if you would recognize true excellence if you saw it." Richard's face flushed red. This was unprecedented. In his world, people like Elena didn't challenge people like him. They apologized. They cowered. They accepted their place in the social hierarchy. This unexpected defiance both infuriated and intrigued him. "Dad," Marcus tried to intervene, stepping forward. "Maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Marcus," Richard snapped, without taking his eyes off Elena. A dangerous smile spread across his face. No. This is interesting. The dishwasher wants to cook." He turned to his dinner guests, wealthy socialites, and business partners who had come to celebrate the opening of his newest location. "Ladies and gentlemen, what do you say? Should we let her embarrass herself? The guests murmured among themselves. Some looked uncomfortable, others amused. One woman, Catherine Devereaux, a food critic for the New York Times, watched the scene with interest. Her journalistic instincts tingling. "I'll make you a deal," Richard announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you can cook a dish, any dish that impresses my head chef, Jacques Beaumont, then I'll promote you. Hell, I'll make you a line cook." He paused, for dramatic effect. "But when you fail, and you will fail, you'll leave here tonight without your job, without a reference, and everyone in this kitchen will know exactly what happens to people who don't know their place." Jacques shifted uncomfortably. "Monsieur Castellan, perhaps this is not—" "Jacques," Richard barked. "You'll judge fairly, won't you? After all, you've tasted dishes from the best chefs in Europe. Surely you can identify if this woman has any talent whatsoever." The French chef looked at Elena with apologetic eyes. "What would you cook, madame?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. Around her, the kitchen staff watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. They had all witnessed Richard's cruelty before, the way he belittled servers, screamed at cooks, and treated anyone he considered beneath him with contempt. But none of them had ever seen anyone stand up to him like this. "Coq au vin," Elena finally said. "Traditional, with pearl onions, bacon lardons, and mushrooms, the way it's meant to be made." Richard burst out laughing. "Coq au vin? You're going to make coq au vin? That's a dish that takes hours to prepare properly. The wine reduction alone—" He shook his head, genuinely amused now. "You realize you're just proving my point? You have no idea what you're talking about." "I didn't say I would make it from scratch tonight," Elena clarified. Her dark eyes swept across the kitchen, taking inventory of ingredients and supplies with a speed and precision that made Jacques raise his eyebrows. "I said I would make coq au vin. You have chicken stock simmering, I can smell it. You have a burgundy reduction that's been prepared for tomorrow's service. You have fresh thyme in the herb garden outside. Your night prep team has already prepared pearl, onions, and bacon." The kitchen staff exchanged glances. Everything she said was accurate. How would a dishwasher know these details? "I can have a dish ready in 40 minutes, Elena continued. "And it will be the best coq au vin anyone in this room has ever tasted." Richard's smile faded slightly. There was something in her certainty that unnerved him. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Fine," Richard decided, his competitive nature overriding his caution. 40 minutes. Jacques will judge. If he says it's good, not great, but good, you can stay on as dishwasher. If he says it's excellent, I'll promote you, like I said. His eyes glittered with malice. But when it's anything less than good, you leave immediately. And I'll make sure every restaurant in Manhattan knows that you're a troublemaker who got fired for incompetence. Marcus stepped forward again. "Dad, this is wrong. She's been working hard." And, "Marcus, either support your father or leave." Richard snapped. "Actually, why don't you film this? I want documentation of what happens when people get ideas above their station." The young man hesitated, clearly torn between his father's expectations and his own conscience. Finally, reluctantly, he pulled out his phone. Catherine Devereaux, the food critic, also had her phone out, but for different reasons. She had built her career on exposing both culinary excellence and the dark underbelly of the restaurant industry. This situation had all the hallmarks of something worth documenting. Elena moved toward the main prep station with a confidence that made several cooks step aside instinctively. Jacques watched her carefully, his experienced eye, noting the way she assessed the kitchen, the efficiency of her movements, the purposeful way she gathered ingredients. "Mon Dieu," he whispered to Maria. "Watch how she moves. That's not the movement of an amateur." Elena selected a copper sauté pan, not the most expensive one, but the one that was perfectly seasoned and weighted. She tested its balance, with a subtle wrist movement that made Jacques' eyes widen. "Where did you—" the chef began. But Elena was already working. She moved through the kitchen like a dancer who had memorized every step of a complex choreography. Her hands flew across cutting boards, her knife work precise and impossibly fast. Pearl onions were peeled and trimmed in seconds. Bacon was cut into perfect lardons. Mushrooms were cleaned and quartered with strokes so precise they could have been measured with a ruler. "She's been hiding this," Maria murmured to the line cook beside her. "All this time, she's been washing dishes. And she's been hiding this." Richard watched with growing unease as Elena worked. This wasn't the fumbling of an amateur trying to copy something they'd seen on television. This was the work of someone who had spent years, decades, perfecting their craft. Elena heated the pan with the kind of patience that only comes from true understanding. She rendered the bacon until it was perfectly crisp, removed it, then used the fat to sear the chicken pieces that Jacques had prepared for tomorrow's service. The skin crisped to a golden brown that made several cooks unconsciously lean forward to see better. "The temperature," Jacques muttered, almost to himself. "She knows exactly how to manage the temperature." Wine was added a generous amount from a bottle of Burgundy that Richard kept for special preparations. Elena let it reduce, her eyes never leaving the pan, adjusting the heat with tiny movements of her wrist. The aromatics went in next: shallots, garlic, fresh thyme, bay leaves. The kitchen filled with a scent that made everyone present stop what they were doing. "How long has it been?" Richard demanded, his voice tight. 23 minutes, Marcus reported, his phone still recording but his attention completely absorbed by Elena's work. She built the sauce with layers of flavor stock, tomato paste, a touch of brandy that she flambéed with a casual flick that made even Jacques gasp. The flames shot up, dramatic and controlled, and Elena didn't even flinch. She had done this thousands of times before. The components came together like pieces of a puzzle designed by a master craftsman. The chicken returned to the pan, surrounded by vegetables and bacon. The sauce was adjusted with a precision that spoke of instinct honed over years. A final garnish of fresh parsley and a knob of butter stirred in at the last second to add richness. 38 minutes, Marcus announced quietly. Elena plated the dish with the care of someone presenting a work of art. The chicken was arranged perfectly, the sauce glistening, the vegetables positioned with deliberate aesthetic consideration. She placed the plate on the counter in front of Jacques Beaumont and stepped back, her expression calm despite the intensity of what she had just accomplished. The head chef approached the dish like a priest approaching an altar. He bent to smell it first, closing his eyes as the aroma hit him. His expression shifted from professional skepticism to something like wonder. "C'est impossible," he whispered. "Taste it," Richard commanded, his voice betraying his nervousness. "Tell me what you think." Jacques cut into the chicken. The meat was tender, falling off the bone with the slightest pressure. He took a small bite, chewing slowly, his eyes closing again. The kitchen held its collective breath. When Jacques opened his eyes, there were tears streaming down his face. "Mon Dieu," he breathed. This is perfect. No, more than perfect. This is how my grandmother made coq au vin in Lyon when I was a boy. This is âme, soul." The kitchen erupted in whispers. Richard's face had gone pale. "What do you mean perfect?" he demanded. "It's just coq au vin. It's a simple dish." "Simple?" Jacques turned to his employer with an expression of profound disappointment. "Monsieur, there is nothing simple about what I just tasted. This dish has technique that takes decades to master. The wine reduction is flawless, not too sweet, not too acidic. The chicken is cooked to exactly the right temperature. The layering of flavors is extraordinary. This is the work of a master chef." He turned back to Elena, his professional pride warring with his curiosity. "Madame, where did you train?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. Around her, the kitchen staff watched with rapt attention. Even the dinner guests, who had initially come for entertainment, now leaned forward, sensing that something significant was happening. "I trained in Paris," she said finally, her voice soft but clear, "at l'École supérieure de cuisine française. I studied under Chef André Moreau, who studied under Auguste Escoffier's last living student." The kitchen gasped collectively. Jacques actually staggered backward. "That's impossible," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. André Moreau? He only took 3 students in his entire career. One of them was. His voice trailed off as memory and recognition collided. One of them was Elena Sandoval, the first woman to earn 3 Michelin stars before age 30. But that was 20 years ago. She disappeared after my restaurant burned down, Elena finished quietly. After I lost everything in a single night. After the insurance company refused to pay because they claimed I'd started the fire myself. After the media destroyed my reputation based on lies. After the industry I had devoted my life to turned its back on me because it was easier to believe a convenient lie than an inconvenient truth. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds from the dining room seemed to fade away. Elena Sandoval, Jacques whispered reverently. I have your cookbook. I studied your techniques when I was just beginning. You were a legend. Why were you washing dishes? Elena smiled sadly. Because when you lose everything, Mr. Beaumont, you take whatever work you can find. And because I had learned that sometimes the world needs to be reminded that excellence has nothing to do with position, and everything to do with passion, dedication, and soul. She turned to Richard Castellane, who looked like he had been struck by lightning. You made me a deal, Mr. Castellane, Elena said quietly. Your head chef has judged my work. I believe you owe me a promotion. Richard opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. For the first time in his adult life, he was completely at a loss for words. But the night's revelations were just beginning, and the consequences of his prejudice and cruelty were about to cascade through his life in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Catherine Devereux lowered her phone, her journalist's mind already composing the article that would make front-page news by morning. But first, she had questions that needed answers. Miss Sandoval, she said, stepping forward. Catherine Devereux, New York Times. If you don't mind my asking, how did one of the most celebrated chefs of your generation end up washing dishes in someone else's restaurant? Elena looked at the critic with tired eyes that had seen too much. How does anyone fall, Miss Devereux? One moment of bad luck, followed by a series of worse decisions by people in power. Richard had recovered some of his composure, though his face remained pale. Now wait just a minute. If you're really Elena Sandoval, which I still have serious doubts about, then you've been lying to my HR department. You applied under the name Elena Martinez. That's fraud. Martinez is my mother's maiden name, Elena replied calmly. After the fire destroyed my reputation along with my restaurant, I learned that the name Elena Sandoval made it impossible to get work anywhere in the food industry. Too many people believed the lies. So I did what millions of immigrants and people starting over have always done. I used another name and started from scratch. Marcus had stopped recording and was now listening intently. His father's phone still in his hand. What actually happened that night? The night of the fire? Elena was quiet for a moment, her hands gripping the edge of the prep counter. Jacques moved closer, as did Maria and several other staff members. Even the line cooks who had been working throughout the exchange had abandoned their stations to hear the story. My restaurant, La Mer Étoilée, was in the process of being sold. Elena began, her accented English taking on a rhythmic quality as she stepped into memories she had tried to bury for 2 decades. I had built it from nothing, over 12 years. 3 Michelin stars, reservations booked 8 months in advance. A waiting list of investors who wanted to partner with me. She paused, her dark eyes distant. But there was one investor I refused. Harrison Pemberton. Richard's eyes widened. Wait. Harrison Pemberton, the restaurant mogul? He owns half the fine dining establishments in Manhattan. He owns them now, Elena corrected. 20 years ago, he was still building his empire. And he wanted my restaurant as his crown jewel. When I refused to sell, when I told him that La Mer Étoilée would never be part of a corporate chain, he made it very clear that I would regret my decision. Jacques inhaled sharply. The fire started in the electrical system, according to the official report. Elena continued, her voice hardening. But I had just had the entire restaurant rewired 3 months earlier. Everything was up to code, inspected, and certified. Yet somehow, that night, while I was at my sister's baby shower, a fire started that burned my restaurant to the ground. The insurance investigation concluded that the fire was deliberately set, Catherine interjected, clearly familiar with the case. And they claimed you were the most likely suspect because you were having financial difficulties. Financial difficulties that Harrison Pemberton himself created, Elena said bitterly. He used his connections to pressure my suppliers, to spread rumors about my restaurant, to plant negative reviews. He made it nearly impossible for me to operate profitably. Then, when the fire happened, he made sure the investigation pointed at me. She looked directly at Richard. Do you know what it's like, Mr. Castellane, to have everything you worked for destroyed in a single night? To watch the media tear apart your reputation while you're powerless to defend yourself? To have every door in your industry slammed shut because people would rather believe a convenient lie than risk upsetting a powerful man? The kitchen remained silent, everyone absorbing the weight of Elena's words. I lost everything, she continued softly. My restaurant. My reputation. My savings fighting the insurance company in court, a case I eventually lost because Pemberton's lawyers were better than anything I could afford. I lost custody of my nephew, whom I was raising after my sister died, because the court decided I was financially unstable and morally questionable. Marcus looked stricken. That's horrible. Why didn't you fight back? Tell people what really happened. Elena laughed without humor. With what resources, Mr. Castellane? With what platform? I was a single woman without family, money, or powerful connections. Harrison Pemberton was, and still is, one of the most influential people in the industry. Who would believe me? I would have, Jacques said quietly. Anyone who knew your work would have believed you. Would they? Elena challenged gently. Or would they have done what most people did, stay silent to protect their own careers? The restaurant industry is small, Mr. Beaumont. And it has a long memory. People who defended me found themselves suddenly unable to get jobs, unable to get investments, unable to get reservations at the restaurants that mattered. Catherine was typing rapidly on her phone, her journalist's instincts fully engaged. This is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told. The abuse of power, the systematic destruction of someone's career. It's also a story without proof, Richard interrupted, though his tone was less aggressive than before. You're describing serious allegations against one of the most powerful men in the restaurant industry. I have proof, Elena said quietly. The kitchen froze again. Even Catherine stopped typing. What do you mean? You have proof? Richard demanded. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. For 20 years, I've kept this. Documentation of everything. Emails from Pemberton, threatening me. If I didn't sell, records of him pressuring my suppliers. Witness statements from employees who heard him planning to take care of the problem of my restaurant. Even a recorded conversation where he admits to having connections with the fire investigator. Then why haven't you used it? Marcus asked, genuinely confused. Why wash dishes for minimum wage when you could expose him? Elena's eyes softened as she looked at the young man. Because I learned something important after losing everything, Mr. Castellane. Revenge isn't worth sacrificing your peace. For years, I was angry, bitter, consumed by the need to make Harrison Pemberton pay for what he did. But that anger was destroying me from the inside. She held up the USB drive. I kept this not because I was planning to use it, but because it was the only evidence that I was telling the truth. It was the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't crazy, like I hadn't imagined the injustice. But now, Catherine prompted. Now, Elena said slowly. I think perhaps it's time. Not for revenge, but for justice. Not to destroy Harrison Pemberton, but to make sure he can't destroy anyone else the way he destroyed me. Richard had been listening to all of this with an expression that slowly shifted from skepticism to something like shame. He cleared his throat. Miss Sandoval Martinez, whoever you are, I owe you an apology. Elena raised an eyebrow. Do you? Don't be difficult, Richard snapped, then caught himself. I mean, yes, I do. The way I spoke to you tonight was inappropriate. I made assumptions based on your position, your appearance, your background. My skin color, Elena said bluntly. You can say it, Mr. Castellane. You assume that, because I'm Latina and working as a dishwasher, I must be uneducated, unskilled, and unworthy of respect. Richard flinched, but didn't contradict her. Yes, that's exactly what I did, and I was wrong. You were wrong about her, Jacques interjected. But what about all the other employees you've treated the same way? What about José, who washes vegetables and whom you call the Mexican, even though he's from El Salvador? What about Lynn, who does prep work and whom you've never bothered to learn the proper name of? The other kitchen staff murmured agreement. Years of resentment and suppressed anger bubbled to the surface. You run a restaurant empire built on the labor of people you consider beneath you, Maria added, her voice sharp. You pay minimum wage to workers who keep this place running while you collect millions. You cut corners on their benefits while buying yourself another Rolex. And you treat them like they're disposable. Richard's face flushed red, his earlier shame transforming back into defensive anger. I built this empire from scratch. Your father built it, Marcus interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. You inherited it, and you've been running it into the ground with your arrogance and cruelty for years. Marcus! Richard turned on his son. How dare you? No, Dad, how dare you? The young man stepped forward, 26 years of resentment finally finding voice. I've watched you humiliate people for years. I've heard you make racist comments, sexist jokes, and classist assumptions. I've seen you treat employees like they're beneath you, like their lives don't matter. And I've stayed silent because I was afraid of you. The dinner guests who had followed Richard into the kitchen were now edging toward the exit, clearly uncomfortable with how the evening had devolved. But Catherine Devereaux remained, her phone still recording, capturing every word. You want to know the real reason I've been spending time learning the business? Marcus continued. It's not because I want to take over from you. It's because the board of directors asked me to document your behavior. They've been looking for a reason to force you out for years. Richard staggered backward as if physically struck. The board? You've been working with the board against me? Against your toxic management style? Marcus clarified. Not against you personally. Although, after tonight, he gestured around the kitchen. After watching you humiliate Miss Sandoval, try to destroy her dignity, make cruel bets about her abilities, I think we have more than enough evidence. Elena held up her hand. Mr. Castellane, the younger Mr. Castellane, while I appreciate your support, I don't want to be used as a weapon in a corporate power struggle. This isn't about corporate politics, Marcus insisted. This is about doing what's right. My father has been abusing his position for years. The way he treated you tonight is just one example of a pattern that's hurt dozens of people. Catherine stepped forward. Miss Sandoval, if I may, this story is bigger than just what happened to you 20 years ago. This is about systemic abuse in the restaurant industry. The way workers are exploited, the way talent is ignored if it doesn't fit certain demographics, the way people like Harrison Pemberton and Richard Castellane can destroy careers with impunity. Elena looked at the USB drive in her hand, then at the faces surrounding her kitchen workers who had been invisible to most people in power. A young man trying to break free from his father's toxic legacy, a journalist ready to expose injustice, and a head chef whose respect for her craft transcended any prejudice. If I do this, she said slowly, if I release this evidence and tell my full story, it won't just affect Harrison Pemberton. It will shake the entire industry. Powerful people will be exposed. Careers will be destroyed. And I'll be pulled back into a spotlight I've spent 20 years avoiding. But you'll also be free, Jacques said gently. Free from the false narrative that has defined you for 2 decades. Free to reclaim your name and your legacy. Free to show the world who Elena Sandoval really is. Elena was quiet for a long moment, Decades of pain and suppression, warring with the possibility of redemption and justice. "There's something else you should know," Marcus said quietly. "Harrison Pemberton is planning to acquire my father's restaurant group. The deal is supposed to close next month. If it goes through, he'll control nearly 40% of the fine dining establishments in Manhattan. And based on what you've described, he'll use that power to force out anyone who doesn't fall in line." This information seemed to tip the scales. Elena's expression hardened with determination. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do this. But we do it right. Not just exposing Pemberton and what happened to me, but investigating the broader pattern. How many other chefs has he destroyed? How many workers has he exploited? How deep does this corruption go?" Catherine nodded eagerly. "I have sources throughout the industry. Give me a week to investigate, and I can build a comprehensive story." "Use my resources," Marcus offered. "Our company records show all of Pemberton's business dealings, his partnerships, his acquisition patterns. If there's evidence of systematic abuse, it'll be in there." Richard had been listening to all of this with growing horror, realizing that his world was crumbling around him. "You're all insane," he muttered. "You can't go after Harrison Pemberton. He'll destroy all of you." "He tried to destroy me once," Elena said calmly. "He failed. Because you can take away someone's restaurant, their reputation, their income, but you can't take away their skill, their knowledge, or their dignity. Those things are permanent." She turned to Jacques. "I assume Mr. Castellane's promise of promotion is no longer on the table, given the circumstances." The French chef smiled. "On the contrary, Miss Sandoval, I would be honored if you would consider joining our kitchen not as a line cook, but as a consultant. We have many talented people here who could learn from a master." "Jacques," Richard sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can, and I will," Jacques interrupted firmly. "In fact, Mr. Castellane, if you refuse, I will resign and take most of your kitchen staff with me. I've stayed here out of loyalty and love for the craft. But I will not continue to work for someone who treats people the way you treated Miss Sandoval tonight." Maria and several other staff members nodded their agreement. Richard realized, with growing panic, that he was on the verge of losing everything: his staff, his reputation, his business, and perhaps most importantly, his son's respect. The evening that had begun with cruel entertainment had transformed into something far more significant, a reckoning not just for Richard Castellane, but for an entire industry built on exploitation and prejudice. And Elena Sandoval, who had spent 20 years in the shadows, was about to step back into the light. Not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change that would reshape the culinary world forever. Catherine Devereaux's article hit the New York Times website at 6:47 a.m. the following morning. By 8 a.m., it had been shared over 100,000 times. By noon, it was trending worldwide. The headline read, "Fallen Star, Hidden Legend. How One Woman's Story Exposes Decades of Abuse in Fine Dining." The article included everything: Elena's full story, corroborated by documents from the USB drive, testimony from former employees of Harrison Pemberton's restaurants, financial records showing systematic exploitation of workers, and, most devastatingly, a video that Marcus had recorded of Richard Castellane's cruel treatment of Elena the night before. The video showing Richard's racist comments, his humiliating challenge, and his complete shock when Elena revealed her true identity went viral within hours. But what truly captured public attention wasn't just the cruelty. It was Elena's dignity throughout the ordeal, her masterful cooking under pressure, and her quiet strength in the face of someone who had tried to diminish her. By the afternoon, Harrison Pemberton's restaurant empire was in free fall. 3 major investors pulled out of the planned acquisition of Castellane Holdings. 5 celebrity chefs who had partnered with Pemberton publicly cut ties. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office announced an investigation into the fire that destroyed La Mer Étoilée 2 decades earlier, citing new evidence. Richard Castellane, arrived at his flagship restaurant at 2 p.m. to find protesters outside, a mixture of restaurant workers' rights advocates, former employees with stories of their own mistreatment, and food lovers who were outraged by what they'd learned. Inside, he found his son waiting with the company's board of directors. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "we need to talk." The meeting lasted 3 hours. When it ended, Richard Castellane no longer owned controlling interest in the company that bore his family name. The board had voted unanimously to force him out, offering a settlement that was generous but came with strict conditions: a public apology, agreement to never work in the restaurant industry again, and mandatory participation in sensitivity and ethics training. Meanwhile, Elena found herself at the center of a media storm she never wanted. Her phone, which had been silent for years, now rang constantly with offers. Television producers wanted to turn her story into a documentary. Publishers wanted her memoir. Restaurant owners wanted her name attached to their establishments. But it was a different offer that truly interested her. Jacques Beaumont, Maria Rodriguez, and 15 other employees from La Couronne d'Or had pooled their savings and secured a small business loan. They wanted to open a restaurant together, a cooperative where every employee had ownership stake and voice in management. And they wanted Elena to be their head chef. "It wouldn't be like your old restaurant," Jacques explained when they met at a small cafe in Queens. "We don't have millions to invest. We're looking at a modest space, probably in Brooklyn." "Nothing fancy." "Nothing fancy sounds perfect," Elena replied, surprising them all with her quick acceptance. Maria leaned forward. "You could have your pick of establishments, Miss Sandoval. Why would you choose to work with us?" Elena smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in 20 years. "Because you see me. Not Elena Sandoval, the legend. Not Elena Martinez, the dishwasher. But the person who loves cooking and wants to create something meaningful. Because a cooperative restaurant where every worker has dignity and ownership, that's the kind of business that could actually change things." The restaurant opened 6 months later in a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn. They called it La Segunda Oportunidad, the second chance. It had 45 seats, exposed brick walls decorated with artwork from local artists, and a kitchen visible to all diners. The menu changed daily based on what ingredients were fresh and available. On opening night, Elena stood in the kitchen, surrounded by her new partners, former dishwashers, line cooks, and servers who now co-owned a restaurant that celebrated their contributions. Jacques commanded the hotline with joy. Maria ran the pass with precision. Every person wore a chef's coat, embroidered not with hierarchy, but with their name and the title, partner. The dining room filled quickly with an unexpected mix of people. There were food critics. Of course, Catherine Devereaux had brought half the culinary press in New York. But there were also former colleagues from Elena's days at La Mer Étoilée, workers' rights advocates, and regular people from the neighborhood who were curious about the restaurant that had been making headlines. And in the corner booth sat Marcus Castellane, who had quietly invested in the cooperative after his father's forced retirement. Beside him sat a woman in her early 40s, Elena's niece, whom she hadn't seen since losing custody decades earlier. Aunt Elena, Sophia had written in the letter that accompanied her reservation request. "I've followed your story since it broke. I always knew the truth about what happened, even when I was too young to understand it fully. My mother, your sister, she told me before she died that you were the strongest person she knew." The reunion had been tearful and healing. Sophia, now a successful attorney, had brought her own daughters to meet their great-aunt. Family, lost for so long, was beginning to return. Elena cooked that night with joy she hadn't felt in 20 years. Each dish that left the kitchen carried not just skill and technique, but soul, the kind of cooking that can only come from someone who has suffered, endured, and emerged with their passion intact. The reviews were unanimous in their praise. But more importantly, La Segunda Oportunidad became profitable within 3 months and spawned a movement. Within a year, 17 other cooperative restaurants had opened across the country, all following the model of shared ownership and dignity for all workers. Harrison Pemberton's empire, meanwhile, crumbled completely. The investigation into the fire revealed extensive evidence of arson for hire, not just in Elena's case, but in 3 other incidents where Pemberton had eliminated competition. He was arrested, tried, and convicted of multiple counts of arson conspiracy, insurance fraud, and racketeering. His sentence: 15 years in federal prison. On the day of his sentencing, Elena was cooking lunch service at La Segunda Oportunidad. A reporter called, asking for her reaction to Pemberton's conviction. "I forgave him years ago," Elena said simply, "not because he deserved forgiveness, but because carrying that anger was poisoning my life. Justice is important, and I'm glad he can't hurt anyone else. But my focus isn't on his punishment. It's on building something better." Richard Castellane's fate was different. Stripped of his business and reputation, he spent months in isolation, drinking heavily and avoiding public appearances. But gradually, something shifted. He began volunteering at a food bank, then at a soup kitchen. He took classes on diversity and inclusion. He started attending support groups for people learning to unlearn their prejudices. A year after the incident, he reached out to Elena through Marcus, asking if they could meet. She agreed to have coffee at a neutral location. "I don't expect forgiveness," Richard said, looking older and more haggard than she remembered. "I just wanted you to know that I really see how wrong I was. Not just about you, but about how I viewed the world. I built my entire identity on feeling superior to others, and it was all based on nothing but privilege and prejudice." Elena listened quietly, evaluating his sincerity. Years of experience had taught her to recognize genuine contrition versus performative apology. "What are you doing now?" she asked. "Working," Richard replied. "At a community kitchen in the Bronx. Minimum wage. Scrubbing pots. Taking orders from people I would have looked down on a year ago. And actually learning about humility, dignity, and what real strength looks like." He looked directly at her. "I spent my whole life thinking power came from money and position. But watching you stand up in my kitchen that night, maintaining your dignity while I tried to destroy it, that's real power. That's real strength. And it humbled me in ways I'm still processing." Elena studied him for a long moment. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Castellane. And I'm glad you're on a path toward growth. But I want to be clear. My forgiveness isn't necessary for your redemption. You need to forgive yourself and actually become the person you're trying to be." Richard nodded. "I understand. Thank you for meeting with me. And thank you, though I know it's insufficient, for showing me who I really was, even though the lesson was humiliating." They parted on civil terms, 2 people whose lives had intersected in the most dramatic way possible, forever changed by a single evening's confrontation. 3 years after that night, La Segunda Oportunidad had expanded to 3 locations and inspired hundreds of cooperative businesses across multiple industries. Elena had published a cookbook that became a bestseller, not just recipes, but a memoir of resilience, redemption, and revolution in how we think about work and dignity. She stood in the kitchen of the original location on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, teaching a young cook named Jamal how to properly reduce a wine sauce. He was 19, had grown up in foster care, and had started as a dishwasher 6 months earlier. Elena saw in him the spark of genuine talent and was mentoring him the way she had never been able to mentor others during her years in exile. "Like this?" Jamal asked, adjusting the heat with careful precision. "Perfect," Elena replied, watching the sauce develop with the exact consistency she'd been describing. "You have good instincts. Have you thought about culinary school?" Jamal shook his head. "Can't afford it. And anyway, who'd want to invest in a kid from nowhere?" Elena smiled. "I did. The cooperative did. We all did when we made you a partner last month." She had quietly arranged for him to receive a small ownership stake, the same as every other employee who showed dedication and talent. Jamal's eyes widened. "You made me a partner?" "We made you a partner," Elena corrected, "because you earned it. And because everyone deserves the chance to build something meaningful with their life, regardless of where they start." That evening, as service began and the dining room filled with people from all walks of life, Elena stood in her kitchen and felt something she hadn't felt in over 20 years. Complete peace. The young girl from a small village in Colombia, who had dreamed of becoming a chef. The woman who had reached the pinnacle of success, only to have it all destroyed. The invisible dishwasher who had maintained her dignity while washing other people's plates. The legend who had returned not for revenge, but for redemption. All of these versions of herself had led to this moment. A kitchen full of people who respected each other. A business built on equity and dignity. And a legacy that had nothing to do with awards or stars, but everything to do with human worth. Jacques approached during a quiet moment between courses. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up the chance to rebuild your empire? You could have opened a new La Mer Étoilée. You could have claimed your place among the celebrity chefs." Elena looked around her kitchen at the diverse faces of her partners, at the system they'd built together where everyone had voice and ownership, at the quality of food they produced, not despite their cooperative model, but because of it. "This is my place," she said simply, "not above anyone, not below anyone, with people who see value in every human being, regardless of their title or background. This is what success actually looks like." Marcus arrived for his weekly dinner, bringing Sophia and her daughters. The multi-generational family gathered around one of the better tables, and Elena sent out a tasting menu that represented her journey. Traditional Colombian flavors mixed with French technique, humble ingredients elevated to artwork, each dish telling a story of resilience and transformation. As she plated the final dessert, a deconstructed tres leches cake that had been her sister's favorite, Elena thought about the plate she had dropped that fateful night. How a moment of clumsiness had triggered a confrontation that changed not just her life, but sparked a broader conversation about dignity, respect, and equality in an industry built on hierarchy and exploitation. She had lost everything once, and in losing everything, she had discovered what truly mattered. Not recognition or wealth, but purpose, community, and the simple dignity of being seen and valued for who you are. The dinner service ended around midnight. Her partners cleaned and closed the kitchen together, sharing stories and laughter, planning for tomorrow's menu. Elena watched them with deep satisfaction, knowing that this collective creation of something beautiful and meaningful was worth more than all the Michelin stars in the world. She walked home through Brooklyn's quiet streets, past murals, celebrating workers' dignity and cooperative economics. The neighborhood had embraced La Segunda Oportunidad not just as a restaurant, but as a symbol of what was possible when people chose equity over hierarchy, humanity over profit margins. Her phone buzzed with a message from Catherine, who was now working on a documentary about the cooperative restaurant movement that Elena had inadvertently inspired. Chapter 12 of the script is ready for your review. You're going to love how this story ends. Elena smiled, typing back. The story doesn't end. It's just beginning. And she was right. Because true change doesn't happen in a single moment of confrontation or revelation. It happens in the daily choices to treat people with dignity, to build systems that value everyone's contributions, to see potential where others see only limitations. A single dropped plate had set in motion a cascade of events that exposed corruption, sparked national conversation, and rebuilt an industry from the inside out. But more importantly, it had reminded everyone watching that excellence has nothing to do with position or background, and everything to do with skill, dedication, and the courage to remain true to yourself, even when the world tries to diminish you. Elena Sandoval had lost everything and rebuilt something even better. She had faced prejudice with dignity, cruelty with grace, and injustice with patience. She had taught the world that the most powerful response to those who underestimate you isn't revenge, it's simply being extraordinary while remaining humble. And sometimes, that's the most revolutionary act of all. The end.